Let's talk about IRS penalty abatement. Specifically, we're going to learn how to use the IRS's First-Time Penalty Abatement Administrative Waiver, or FDA. FDA provides some penalty relief for taxpayers who've been in compliance in the past but have an unfortunate one-time penalty. First-time penalty abatement has been around since 2001, but only about 1 out of 5 eligible taxpayers use this waiver to lower their penalties. FDA can be used to lower 3 types of penalties: failure to file, failure to pay, and failure to deposit. Failure to file and failure to pay penalties can be abated for individual taxpayers who file Forms 1040, business taxpayers who file Form 1065, 1120, and 1120S, and employers who file Forms 940, 941, and 944. Failure to deposit penalties can also be abated using first-time penalty abatement for employers who file Forms 940, 941, and 944. It's important to understand that first-time penalty abatement cannot be used to abate accuracy or estimated tax penalties. Many taxpayers mistakenly try to get these penalties abated under first-time penalty abatement. First-time penalty abatement can be used to remove any and all of these 3 penalties for the first period only, if you qualify. It cannot be used to abate multiple years of consecutive penalties. To qualify, you must meet all of the conditions of a clean compliance history. A clean compliance history requires that taxpayers have met these 4 requirements. First, you must have filed all of your required tax returns, including the 3 years prior to the penalty year in question. Second, if there's an outstanding tax bill, you must be in an IRS agreement to pay it and be meeting the terms of that agreement. This commonly means a payment plan, but it can also include extensions to pay agreement and hardship agreements. Third, you can have no disqualifying penalties in the 3 years prior to the penalty. Disqualifying penalties include any failure to file, failure to pay, or accuracy penalties. For employers, that also includes failure to deposit penalties. Please note, you can still have an estimated tax penalty in the prior 3 years. That will not disqualify you from first-time penalty abatement. Lastly, you must request first-time penalty abatement timely. That is 3 years after the due date of a return or 2 years after the penalty has been paid. There is not a limit on how much penalty can be abated, and all requests for first-time penalty abatement can be done by the phone with the IRS. Taxpayers will call the number on their notice and request it directly with an IRS representative. Alternatively, they can write to the IRS using a Form 843 and specifically request first-time penalty on the tax period that qualifies. Here's a quick example of how first-time penalty abatement can work. We have an individual taxpayer who files a Form 1040 for 2022 and they pay late. The taxpayer incurs a substantial penalty, $512 and $200 in failure to file and failure to pay penalties. There is no requirement that the taxpayer pay the penalty first before requesting abatement. The taxpayer has filed all past returns, including the 3 years prior to the penalty and the current year, which in our example would be the 2023 tax year. The taxpayer has no failure to file, failure to pay, or accuracy-related penalties in the 3 years prior to 2022. However, the taxpayer does have an estimated tax penalty for 2021 for $220 and a failure to pay penalty for 2023 of $20,900. Neither of these penalties will disqualify the taxpayer for first-time penalty abatement. Estimated tax penalties are not a disqualifying penalty in the prior 3 years, and a future penalty in 2023 will not disqualify the taxpayer from first-time penalty abatement in 2022. However, also note that the 2023 failure to pay penalty cannot qualify for first-time penalty abatement, as there was a disqualifying penalty in 2022. In our example, the taxpayer qualifies for first-time penalty abatement. On December 1st, 2024, the taxpayer requests abatement from the IRS using first-time penalty abatement, and it's granted. The taxpayer receives an IRS letter 168C confirming the abatement in 3 weeks. That's how FDA works. If you don't qualify for first-time penalty abatement, you can still get penalties abated if you qualify for another IRS relief provision. Reasonable cause relief, where you can show circumstances outside of your control that caused you not to file or pay on time, And reasonable cause is primarily done in writing and can take months to complete. Often you'll have to have an appeal, and it's just not as easy as first-time penalty abatement.